Beautifully executed. It has the original silver handle.
This portrait really conveys the charisma. Wow. Wow.
This Lincoln-inscribed photograph has been in the Guest family since 1862. The picture was given to her great-great-grandfather, who was part of Lincoln's campaign team in Ohio. The picture is believed to have been given by Lincoln himself to the Guest relative during a dinner at the White House. This is stated in the letter attached to the picture. This photograph, which is in an oversized portrait format, is quite uncommon from the regular carte de visite or small card photographs of Lincoln. These large photographs were typically used for presentations and special occasions, or persons to be given to.
You can see he's the unbearded Lincoln, not the $5 bill Lincoln, as we know. This was taken in 5960 before he came to Washington, because by the time he came to Washington...
This photograph was taken by Christian German, a photographer from Springfield.
So it's fabulous that it's the early photograph of Lincoln from when he had been debating the Lincoln-Douglas debate, period.
The letter dates to 1948. Although dating to a later time than when the picture was given, it helps give the background and connection of the photograph.
The frame is period. It mentions in the letter that he had it framed soon after he was given the picture. It's in great condition.
The appraiser values it at about...
That's why I would give this an auction estimate of a $70,000 to $100,000 auction estimate. I would be thinking about putting a $120,000 insurance value on it.
Next, we look at this Theodore Roosevelt signed photo and gifted watch. These items belong to the Guest grandfather, whose first wife was a cousin to Theodore Roosevelt. Her name was Christine Keene Roosevelt.
And she is a really remarkable figure. She was a debutante the season of 1902, which was famous because 5 Roosevelt cousins came out that year, including Alice Roosevelt, Theodore's oldest daughter.
This is a photograph of Theodore and his 4 sons, Theodore Jr., Archibald, Quentin, and Kermit, which was taken in 1904. This other signature belonged to the photographer, who signed and dated it. This lovely pocket watch was given by Theodore to Christine. It has her initials engraved on the outside. The watch is a 14-karat gold pocket watch by American Waltham. The appraiser values the items at about...
So it's very rare to find the family photograph with signatures of the children as well as the father. I would say that at auction, I would list it between $10,000 and $15,000. By itself, it's probably a $300 watch, but with the association, we would list it at $1,000 to $1,500.
Wonderful.
We move on to an item belonging to the 33rd President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. This President Truman 8-Ball Award was inherited by the Guest whose great-uncle worked in the White House as an aide to Truman. When Truman left office, this award was given to the relatives as a memento. This 8-Ball Award was given to Truman in 1948 by the Los Angeles Press Club. When he received this award, he made a speech befitting the award, although there is no indication that Truman had this award in the White House. The best proof of his ownership is the photograph of him receiving the award from the Press Club. This item is valued at about $7,000 to $10,000. This item was found in the Guest grandmother's estate. It belonged to her grandmother's grandfather, who was a topographical engineer in the Army and also friends with Abraham Lincoln. When he died, Lincoln was present at his funeral as a friend. This item, however, poses a mystery as to how it ended with her family. It is a presidential pardon signed by Lincoln in 1861 for prisoner Charles de Villiers for good behavior and also having no prior run-ins with the law.
President Lincoln granted him a pardon. He was sentenced originally to 18 months in prison and served 6 months of that prison sentence.
The presidential seal is seen easily at the back. It is entirely written in secretarial hand. It has the authentic hand-signed signature of President Lincoln and the Secretary of State witnessing the pardon.
It's just a living, breathing piece of our American history.
This item is valued at...
would be at retail worth between $12,000 to $15,000.
Wow, that's great.
Did you think it would be worth this much? Let us know in the comments. Next, we look at this fascinating silver medal. This medal was found by a worker on the Guest great-grandfather's farm. He traded it for 3 hogs from her great-grandfather. This medal is an authentic 1809 James Madison Indian Peace Medal. It's made of solid silver.
These were minted at the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia and designed by a German immigrant named John Reich, who was the assistant engraver of the U.S. Mint. He also designed a lot of very famous coins.
These medals were given out to representatives of the U.S. government to give to Indian chiefs throughout the Missouri and Mississippi River valleys. They were usually minted in 3 sizes: a 2-inch, a 2.5-inch, and a 3-inch.
And they were given out in importance order: the 3-inch to the most important Indian chiefs, the 2.5-inch, which you have here, to slightly lesser chiefs, and then the 2-inch to maybe even lesser.
Okay.
The front of the medal shows the bust of President Madison. It's inscribed with his name and title, and it dates to around 1809.
Here on the back side of the medal, we have peace and friendship, and it shows a U.S. Army cavalry cuffed hand shaking a bare-wristed hand, so presumably that of an American Indian.
Right.
And above that is the crossed tomahawk and peace pipe.
They commonly lacked suspension loops, but they were often created as the Indians liked wearing them.
These were perceived as very important by American Indians and often traded amongst themselves and sought after even within their communities.
Oh, okay.
This lovely medal is valued at about...
The question, what's the value? If this were to come up at auction, I would expect it to sell for between $20,000 and $30,000.
Wow. Wow.
This guest brings these presidential letters. These letters were written to him by his good friend Bill, long before he became president. That man was Bill Clinton. These are some of the numerous letters shared between them.
This is sort of a general letter. He's just talking about the elections, the details.
These letters show the sentimental side of the young Clinton.
But there was one paragraph in this.
Yes, toward the end of the letter, he says he's been playing rugby a lot, and I've got a cut over my eye, and he said maybe it'll be enough to keep me out of the draft, and he says wishful thinking.
Boy, I imagine that he'd be happy not to have had that letter come out when he was running for president.
He also sends a flyer he got from an anti-war rally. In the flyer, he writes about his disconnect with the practices there.
So he's very much criticizing the speaker here and saying basically the same bull that's going on there is going on in Arkansas.
That's right.
These are very lovely letters to have.
So this is a nice long letter, handwritten, lends insight into his character, his personality. It's signed Bill because you were a friend, so he's not going to sign it William Jefferson Clinton.
Right.
These letters are valued at about...
I would say that note is probably a minimum retail value of $2,000 to $3,000. I would say easily retail, this is a $10,000 letter.
Time flies, yet timeless tales like this watch never age. This pocket watch belonged to William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States. It's a Hampton from the Duber-Hampton Watch Company of Canton, Ohio. This watch was presented to him during his tenure as the governor of Ohio. Made from 18-karat gold, this watch showcases detailed floral engravings, highlighting the artistry of the time. This is a great American collectible watch that served as a token of appreciation and admiration.
What we got here is a crossover collectible. Not only would watch people go crazy for this, and it's a great American collectible watch, it's a politically important piece of Americana and American history.
At appraisal, this watch is valued at...
This watch should bring easily $30,000 to $35,000.
Wow.
This is not your ordinary school picture day snapshot, folks. The guest acquired this portrait about 20 years ago in an estate sale for $40. This is an ironstone picture of Teddy Roosevelt, measuring approximately 14 by 11 inches. It was photographed by Edward Curtis, who was friends with Roosevelt.
It is by Edward Curtis. Curtis and Roosevelt were friends. Curtis had actually photographed Roosevelt and his children in New York in 1904.
Curtis's masterful use of light and shadow highlights Roosevelt's commanding presence as a visionary statesman. The portrait conveys the Rough Rider spirit that people associate with Teddy Roosevelt.
This portrait really conveys the charisma and the energy and the kind of spirit,
the kind of guy he
Rough
was.
Rider spirit that people associate with Teddy Roosevelt, and that's the artistry of Curtis.
The previous auction of this item fetched nearly $18,000 due to its authentic signature. The appraiser values this collection between
Auction estimate would be in the $10,000 to $15,000 price range.
Oh my, no, I didn't have any clue. Wow.
This piece represents a significant time in American history. It shows the 1864 presidential campaign flag of the then president, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States.
Abraham Lincoln didn't fit, so they put Abram.
He took to the polls in 1864 for a second-term re-election, which he won against his opponent, George McClellan, by a landslide.
Lincoln was running against McClellan, who was a Civil War general, and they disliked each other intensely.
The appraiser values this flag at about $10,000 to $15,000. Remarkable man. This guest brings these signed John Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson signed photos, which he took himself. He was the White House photographer for JFK. He started the job right from Kennedy's inauguration day in 1961 to the dreadful assassination in Dallas in 1963. Right after the assassination, he took the only photograph available of Lyndon B. Johnson swearing in.
When I got there, the press secretary, acting press secretary, Malcolm Kilduff, said, "Thank God you're here, Cecil." He said, "The president's going to take his oath on the plane, and you're going to have to service the wires with the photograph."
This other photo was taken on Christmas Day, 1962. The photo was signed by the Kennedys and given to him.
You can read the inscription.
Yeah, it says for Cecil Stoughton, who took this photograph, with appreciation and best wishes always, Jacqueline Kennedy, and then it's signed John Kennedy below.
Johnson also autographed his swearing-in photo, and it is seen in this other photograph.
This photograph of Johnson sitting at his desk, and in order to have some kind of activity, I asked him if he'd sign the pictures. So he's signing this picture, and that's the picture
So
that he signed.
this picture is lying right there.
These are truly remarkable images.
It's difficult when we talk about value with such iconic images, and also these are unique. They're inscribed to you by the president or the president and first lady, so they are unique and obviously irreplaceable.
They are valued at about...
I would value, for insurance value, the photograph of LBJ taking the oath at $50,000. We would insure this one at $25,000. Any significant value. So together, I would put the value for insurance at $75,000.
Okay.
And it is an honor to meet you. These images I knew of my entire life, and I appreciate your work, and I'm glad you finally have some recognition.
Well, thank you very much.
Next up is this presentation sword and Lincoln-signed appointment certificate. These pieces belong to the guest's great-great-grandfather, who was the consul of Bavaria. The sword was presented by the Philadelphia Flying Artillery to its founder, the guest relative, as a token of great esteem. It was presented at the time by the governor of Pennsylvania and Simon Cameron, Lincoln's first Secretary of War.
It's got a beautiful presentation on the front where it was presented by his men to General Max Einstein.
Right.
Wonderful presentation.
The sword was made by the Ames Manufacturing Company in Chicopee, Massachusetts. It has the Ames mark on the back of the scabbard.
This is pretty much the pinnacle of an Ames sword. Beautifully executed. It has the original silver handle with beautiful floral and geometric patterns on the grip.
The appointment certificate mentions how he became the consul of the King of Bavaria.
And what's interesting about this is not only is it an important piece of paper of history, it's also important because of who it's signed by.
This one has a full ink signature all over his hand, deep colors, and no fading.
It's a beautiful signature. And if you notice, it's dated in 1861. That's early in Lincoln's presidency.
The appraiser provides an insurance value on them.
It's not a sword you'd ever decide to sell.
Right.
So I'd insure it for $15,000. And the appointment with the good, clear signatures is something you would need to insure for around $5,000.
Okay, that's good to know.
Fantastic.
An unexpected treasure. This next item was found in the drawer of a desk the guest's father had bought in an antique store. The item, which is an autographed Abraham Lincoln letter, dates to June 1860 from Springfield, Illinois. This letter, which was written by Lincoln, was addressed to Mr. William Jones. Its content talks about how he's very eager to see his old Spencer County friends.
Lincoln lived in Spencer County, Indiana, from the age of 7 to 21. And William Jones was essentially Abraham Lincoln's first employer.
Jones was a mentor to young Abraham, offering him books and teaching him American history.
So this essentially is a letter to his first mentor. Mr. Jones's house in Indiana, it is today a museum because of his association with Lincoln.
Letters of this kind are very rare to find. The appraiser values it at about...
Would have an auction estimate today of probably conservatively $30,000 to $50,000.
Let me know in the comments what you think this item's worth. And at the end, let's see who's closest. This piece was bought in a shop in Evanston, Illinois in 1968 by the guest and her husband. They paid about $200 for it. This is an 1860 Republican presidential campaign chart. This chart reflects the campaign strategies of the Republican Party for Lincoln to emerge victorious in the election. This, however, wasn't a campaign poster, but a commercial poster. It was done by a New York publisher known as H.H. Lloyd.
He also did one for the Democrats, so he wasn't particularly politically inclined, he was commercially inclined.
One of the main campaign points of the Republican Party then was to stop the spread of slavery to the American West. This chart showcases the coverage on its map. This makes it of historic interest.
So all the people against the spread of slavery were horrified, and that's what created the Republican Party. And this map was showing that graphically and saying to the people against the spread of slavery, look, if we don't elect Lincoln...
The appraiser provides information on valuing prints.
What makes prints valuable is they're connected to the time. Well, you can't get any more connected than a poster issued during the campaign.
These prints are quite rare, as probably under 100 of them will be available in decent shape. This chart, which is in very good condition, is valued at about...
In a retail shop, I would expect this to have a value of about $14,000.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Money for... It's as good as you get with historic prints.
That's so nice.
Next on this list is the 1864 Lincoln campaign poster. This poster was given to the guest husband by a friend in 1985. This poster, which reflects the 1864 presidential election, shows Lincoln and his running mate, Andrew Johnson. This poster was usually out on a fence or barn for the campaign. The poster was made by joining several pieces of paper.
And if you look up along here, you can see a seam running down. That was a separate sheet of paper. These were done by wood block. So each color was put on with a different block.
These posters are rare to find, as most have been destroyed during their times on the barns and fences. This particular poster has been restored to reveal its wonderful design.
You had it deacidified, you had it lined, and they did in paint. And you can see in here there's a gap that was filled in, but you've preserved it.
The campaign poster is valued at about $40,000.
Probably very reasonable.
Yeah.
Believed to be James Madison's seal, this guest brings this item that has been in their family for over 100 years. The appraiser is skeptical of its authenticity.
When you said it's James Madison's seal, I was really skeptical. It does have the initials JM on the seal.
Also attached is his motto.
And Madison's personal motto is Veritas non verba magistri, truth, not the word of teachers.
Research into the origin of the seal reveals an interesting story. In September 1828, James Madison wrote a letter to his friend James Barber, who was in London at the time, to help him order a seal that would contain his initials and motto. It is made of rolled gold, which is brass plated with gold. There's a bit of a condition issue on it, as there is a crack on it. This lovely piece, representing the father of the Constitution, is valued at...
I think a good auction estimate of value of this seal is somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000.
Really? Wow, I would not have thought that. Wow, I'm impressed.
On the list is a special George Washington signed letter. This letter was bought by the guest grandfather during his stay in New York. This is a letter written by Washington to the Secretary of War, James McHenry.
Secretary of War, not only with Washington, but with Adams.
Okay.
He was also a doctor in the Revolutionary War. Of course, one of the more famous things about McHenry.
Its contents talk about Washington welcoming McHenry to Mount Vernon.
Correct.
So, and when you read the letter, it says, "Dear sir, I'm going to send my carriage for you and your guests will pick you up and we'll look forward to seeing you." And essentially it refers to Mount Vernon.
It's framed together with pictures of Washington and McHenry to make it graphically more interesting. This bottom piece is of James McHenry's son giving a George Washington autographed letter to an individual.
With the George Washington, and actually all of the writing, it's dark. It's very bold. A lot of these letters tend to fade.
Having these two famous names attached to this letter significantly increases the value. It's valued at about,
I would say on a retail level, this is probably a $10,000 to $15,000 item.
Wow.
We kick off this series with this iconic George Washington commemorative mantle clock. This lovely piece of American presidential history has been in the Guest family for several years, as it was owned by a great-great-grandfather. This commemorative piece is precious, as only a handful were made. It dates to around 1810. The statue depicts George Washington, and it shows him at the time of his famous farewell speech to his officers. Clocks of this type are present in the White House Collection State Department. There are some condition issues with the clock, as the hands have been replaced and the ormolu redone. This does affect the value of the piece. At auction, it's valued at about $125,000. Next, we look at this quite remarkable autograph and picture album. This extraordinary album was found in the Guest great-grandmother's basement in Annisquam, Massachusetts. This album contains the pictures and signatures of President Lincoln and his entire cabinet and Senate members.
There's Abraham Lincoln, autographed by Abraham Lincoln. And who's this guy?
The vice president.
Turn the page, and we see all of the members of Lincoln's cabinet.
The album dates to around the 1860s.
Abraham Lincoln has always been collectible. His autograph has always been collectible. He signed very, very few photographs.
The appraiser talks about the value of the collection.
I'll tell you, most of the value in this album is in the first few pages. Autograph collectors don't value U.S. senators' autographs, and even though it's an autographed photograph, which collectors want more than anything.
At auction, this rare collection is valued at $100,000 to $125,000.
Really?
Never.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thanks. That's great.
A fascinating item. This next piece is a letter containing an eyewitness experience on the 1865 President Lincoln's assassination. This letter was written by the Guest grandfather, who was present at Ford's Theater the night of the assassination. The letter was written on April 21, 1865, to his uncle, describing the events of the week before, which was April 14th. The letter reveals new insights into the events that took place. According to the letter, Harper's Weekly made the mistake of not accurately describing the event. He goes on further to describe the events at the theater. Then, looking at someone in the audience, who was later proved to be an acquaintance, he utters, "I've done it." This lovely piece is valued at about,
a conservative estimate at auction would be $10,000 to $15,000.
This has been my favorite item so far. Which has been yours? Let me know in the comments. These items belong to the Guest husband's great-grandfather, who was the governor of Ohio between 1846 and 1848. These items, which include an inscribed President Lincoln's speech and his funeral invite, show the level of relationship Lincoln had with the Guest relatives.
The first document is black-bordered, and it's an invitation to Abraham Lincoln's funeral services in Springfield.
That's right.
In April 1865.
They are quite rare, as only a few people got them. Also, it comes with the original envelope it was mailed in. This little pamphlet contains Lincoln's Cooper Union address. The speech, titled "The Address of Honorable Abraham Lincoln," was delivered in New York in February 1860, right before the presidential campaign started.
And this happens to be the speech that sort of propelled Lincoln into the national consciousness, made him a national contender for the presidency.
This is the original pamphlet that this important address was read from.
And best of all, up at the top here, is this little ink inscription with respects of A. Lincoln. So this was presented by Lincoln to your ancestor.
These items, which are in pristine condition, are collectively valued at about $77,500.
Wow.
It's a very important piece.
Next is another Harry Truman item. This Truman archive belonged to the guest father. He was the general chairman of the Truman Library auction that was held in the early 50s. This is a picture of his mother, father, Truman, and Bess at the groundbreaking ceremony.
The picture of the dignitaries at the groundbreaking ceremony that was taken at the Slower Park Shelter House, which is on the grounds of the Truman Library.
The Truman Library opened after the Presidential Libraries Act of 1955 was passed. These letters show appreciation for the work and service his dad put into the building of the library.
To build this library, they got donations from, I think, 17,000 different private individuals and groups and institutions that donated to put together a presidential library. And the reason for the library is to keep his papers for research and scholarship down the road.
Among the pile is also an amusing letter from the guest to Truman, so he ended up bringing them back home.
And it's funny because you're asking him to buy, you were offering to buy his signature, and he writes back, here is your autograph, make a good trade.
These lovely letters with the personal connection to Truman and his family are valued at about...
So altogether, I would say insurance value, you'd be looking at about $8,000.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This letter has been in the Guest family for many years. It belonged to her great-great-uncle, who was the colonel of the 91st Division, stationed in Brownsville, Texas in the Civil War. This letter was written and signed by President Lincoln. It's believed to be written about an officer, David C. Edwards, who deserted during the time of war. As of the law then, he was court-martialed and meant to be shot. His fiancée went to the White House and pleaded with Lincoln to pardon him. Hence, the letter.
If David C. Edwards is in any trouble about desertion, suspend action and report the facts to me. Yours, A. Lincoln.
Along with the letter is a carte de visite 1860s-era photograph of the Guest family members, some Confederate money and U.S. money, and an engraving of the Lincoln family.
I find the content of the letter extraordinary. I think it really brings to life who the man and the president, Abraham Lincoln.
This letter, with a fascinating backstory, is valued at about...
I would appraise the letter at retail value at between $10,000 to $12,000.
Oh, my goodness.
We now take a look at these signed Abraham Lincoln pictures and letters. These items belong to the Guest grandfather, who was a collector of Lincoln memorabilia. These two letters were written by Lincoln to General Halleck during the time of the war. They were both written in 1862, the first in May, while the other in October.
The letters are totally in Lincoln's hand, which is a benefit. The signature is wonderful. You were talking about reading the letters, and tell me what you got out of that.
The first letter sees Lincoln appealing to Halleck to promote some officers.
He's so almost apologetic. In one of them, he says he's forsworn doing anything about this, but now he's getting pressure from the Missouri representatives in Congress. And so, like, he doesn't want to interfere with General Halleck. I don't think this kind of politeness would happen today.
In the other one, he talks about the need to replace officers and generals as the war worsens.
But he's talking about General Rousseau and Colonel Pope and saying, look, we've had tremendous losses. I mean, this is just after Shiloh. The battles are going on. And even though the war is sort of on an even keel somewhat, the Union...
Also, there's the picture of Lincoln, which is a carte de visite and in very good condition, with the signature still boldly signed.
When you get to the back of it, though, an interesting item is you have John Hay signing, saying this is an authentic Lincoln signature. It's a Brady photograph.
These letters and signed pictures are collectively valued at about $80,000 to $120,000.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
We draw the curtains on this series with this great piece. This exquisite artifact symbolizes the inauguration of George Washington as the first president of the United States. This collection has been in the Guest family for a long time. George Washington did not wear the sash, but the men did, and the women wore beautiful earrings on the occasion. The appraiser was very excited about this collection. This sash has been framed and is about 7 feet long. The eagle, stars, and colors all add to the class and elegance of the sash. The earrings are not gold, but custom jewelry. The appraiser values this piece at...
The value on a bad day would be $3,000 to $6,000, and this is the kind of object that in the right situation could bring $10,000, $15,000 at an auction setting.
Now we're done. Which one was your favorite piece? Which one had you surprised about its worth? And which do you feel shouldn't be on the list? Imagine this: campaign rallies with people banging on drums, waving flags, and chanting slogans. In 1848, Zachary Taylor and Lewis Cass both ran for president, making it a wild political ride. This drum was used in the presidential campaign of Zachary Taylor and Lewis Cass. This drum is 155 years old, and it survived beautifully. Zachary Taylor was known as Old Rough and Ready. In that era, drums featured holes where ropes were threaded to tighten them, using leather tightened. These are the original hand-carved wooden drumsticks. The appraiser values the collection at...
If I had this drum, I think I'd want between $10,000 and $15,000 for it. No! Yes.
This guest brings an archive of John Kennedy documents on which she worked during his administration. She worked as a press officer.
Well, I worked in the White House press office. I actually started working for him in 1958. I got out of college, and he was just starting his presidential campaign.
Oh, my gosh.
And went then into the White House.
This is a picture of her on an aircraft carrier. These 3 transcripts were of notable speeches she and Kennedy worked on.
To have in the sort of the pantheon of manuscripts, the original or transcripts, which he is obviously revising on the go, as you say, is incredibly interesting to understand the man and his thought process.
This is a speech written in 1961 on the anniversary of Life magazine.
He mentions in the speech the need for the great organizational communications in this country to have an obligation and responsibility to our national life. It sort of picks up his theme of how we all have responsibility.
This is a political speech he gave in Pittsburgh. Here, he rails against the blind opposition of the Republican congressman for a farm bill.
One of the things I note, and we've seen in other cases, that his handwriting was pretty awful.
This is the first draft of his speech at Amherst College for the founding of the Robert Frost Library.
I wanted to talk about this object as well, and you were on the trip to Dallas in 1963.
I was. Well, it was a campaign trip.
Yes.
This is a press manifest of his speech in Dallas. The guest talks about the day of the assassination.
I was on Air Force One, actually in the president's cabin. One of the stewards came through and said, "Put everything away, we've got to leave." And, a couple of minutes later...
This is a truly wonderful and priceless collection.
I look at it from an auction house perspective, and we try to be conservative, but in many cases, the whole is greater than the parts. If one of these pieces were in a family, it wouldn't be the same as the whole entire collection together.
It's valued at $30,000 to $50,000.
Wow.
Of course, on the day, with something so unique and this interesting collection, it could certainly do much better than that.
Thank you. I'm surprised.
This unique piece medal is a significant piece of history. The medal symbolized diplomatic ties between the U.S. government and Native American tribes in Thomas Jefferson's era. In 1803 and 1804, Lewis and Clark took several peace medals on their expedition. This piece was crafted in 2 metal parts, struck and then joined together with a rim. The silver medal features Jefferson's profile on one side and symbols of peace and friendship on the other. The peace medal was a gesture of goodwill. At auction, this rare piece of Americana is valued at about...
I think it would be in the range of around $40,000 to $50,000.
Oh my God.
It's a really rare piece of Americana.
Oh,
it's a great piece of history.
Never thought it would be worth that much. Should I have it fixed?
This rocking chair was used by President Benjamin Harrison during his time in the White House. Crafted from exquisite mahogany wood, the rocker exudes an irresistible aesthetic charm. This guest received this Benjamin rocker, which has a breast plaque from his parents. This is a rare spring seat rocker, probably made by the Hansinger Company in New York. The rocker's ornate details and intricate carvings showcase the skilled artistry of the artisans of that time. The appraiser values this piece at...
And it's probably worth, if it came up at public auction, probably in the area of about $5,000.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Another George Washington letter makes the list. This letter was gifted by the guest's sister to their grandmother in 1980. She bought it from the antique store Charivet in Paris. This letter possibly might be an American War of Independence letter. It was written to a well-known Philadelphia family, and it mentions all the names.
And it mentions all the names. It says here, General Washington has the pleasure to inform Mrs. Powell, the recipient here, and mentions also Benjamin Harrison, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence.
Benjamin Harrison was the signer of the Declaration of the Independence, and at the time, governor of Virginia.
And also the ancestor of 2 presidents of the United States. So it all hangs together in these few lines, and you see it's dated Saturday.
This is indeed a wonderful piece to have.
Well, the value of this, although not as enormous as some of the long Washington letters we've seen, and being in the third person,
it's valued at $8,000 to $12,000.
Oh, really?
That piece of paper is a direct link to the past when the U.S. fought for independence. The Revolutionary War discharge paper was signed by George Washington himself for James Columbus. It bears the marks of tape, wear, and tears, indicating that the veteran kept it close in his pocket at all times. This piece belongs to the guest mother. This artifact isn't just a signature, it's a symbol of bravery, sacrifice, and the birth of a new nation. This is an original Revolutionary discharge paper that dates back to the 1700s. The appraiser values the collection at...
They routinely go for between $6,000 and $10,000, and I'm giving you an auction price now.
That's great.
Another Roosevelt item makes the list. This time it belongs to the other Roosevelt president, Franklin D. Roosevelt. This archive was found in a box of old photographs bought by the guest and her mother at an estate sale. They paid $5 for the box. These archives cover a large span of Roosevelt's life and career, from the 1920s before his election to the White House. These letters were all written to a man named John S. Cohen, who was a pressman and the editor and publisher of the Atlanta Journal at that time. This relationship between Roosevelt and Cohen was of great interest to Roosevelt because by Cohen's position, his ambition could be passed easily to the masses.
So we start off in the 20s, and Roosevelt's talking here about wanting to write an editorial for the paper. Then we follow Roosevelt into the late 20s, into 28, because he was, of course, going to Warm Springs, Georgia.
Here's an invitation to his inauguration that was sent to Cohen.
Later, in 1932, during the presidential election, there was a vacancy in the Georgia seat of the Senate, and Cohen became the United States Senator for Georgia.
Another great position for Roosevelt to utilize. Finally, we see Roosevelt in the White House in 1933. These items as an archive, with a personal touch and a large period, are great among collectors. They are valued at $20,000 to $30,000. JFK's witty remarks to Jackie's elegant prose. These letters are like a time capsule from the past. The guest grandmother, who owned this collection, was a personal friend of the Kennedys. The statements, JFK's most important communication to me, shows a sentimental value to the letter. These letters offer individuals a unique glimpse into the personal and professional exchanges that shaped Kennedy's legacy. It's important to note that handwritten letters hold more value than typed ones with just a signature. JFK writes a lengthy and thoughtful reply to his speech about America's anti-colonial policy, focusing on Algeria. This letter from JFK is called a TLS, that is, a typed letter signed.
This letter is, as we call it, a TLS, a typed letter signed, and often the presidential letters were done with auto pen.
The appraiser values these personalized letters at...
So a conservative auction estimate, $15,000 to $20,000 for the whole archive.
Well, it's exciting to hear and to know.
Whether it's a signed photo, letter, or document, each piece is a treasure. The governor of Minnesota, who was the guest father, accompanied JFK to events to raise campaign funds. Jack Kennedy's family connection is being documented satisfactorily. As a senator, he sent the guest father his book, The Strategy of Peace. These collections are a wonderful relic of a great president. Through authentication, collectors can gain insights into Kennedy's political career and personal life. The appraiser values the whole archive at...
And let's talk value a bit. The inscribed photo is worth $2,000 to $3,000 at auction. The letter as senator, probably put an auction estimate on this of $1,500 to $2,000. The strategy of peace, I would say $1,500 to $2,000.
Well, thank you very much.
Picture this, streets lined with people, all sober, holding a banner to honor the memory of Abraham Lincoln. The guest was gifted this memorabilia by his wife for Christmas. The words, "Uncle Abe, we will not forget you," are largely written on the banner.
Uncle Abe, we will not forget you. From the smallest town to the biggest city, there were demonstrations, parades of mourning.
The torch on the banner was especially useful during nighttime marches. These Lincoln memorial items hold significant value like his campaign items. There are two sides to the banner, each with a different inscription. This is a truly unique item with its original shaft and two-sided sign, which greatly enhances its significance. At auction, this piece of history is valued at...
I were to put this in an auction of historical collectibles, I would think that this would be valued at somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine holding a piece of paper touched and signed by Gerald Ford. These artifacts give us a peek into the past, showing us what was going on in the world during Ford's time. Gerald Ford's real name was Leslie Lynch King, Jr. Two of these letters were written when he was Vice President of the United States. The signatures on these letters authenticate them. These letters are a treasure trove for scholars and enthusiasts alike. The appraiser values these priceless pieces of history at...
The value of this letter was between $4,000 and $6,000. And these signatures are not to be ignored. They would run $800 to $1,000.